But don't forget, the president said that the budget was being implemented in stages, and that's why that one was kind of late. So what was your problem with that step-by-step implementation or stage-by-stage implementation of the budget?
I don't understand what you mean by stage-by-stage budget implementation. I mean, if you pass a budget, what the practice is to release monies, quarterly. I mean, release monies for every 3 months and all that. And if, for example, you have a capital budget of about 1.3 trillion, what it supposes, for example, is that you prorate this and divide by 4, and in each quarter you make releases. So I don't understand what you mean by stage by stage. If, for example, you release about 300 and something billion in the first quarter, and by the second quarter you're releasing less than 100 billion, I don't see how we are justifying that by saying stage by stage budget implementation. I mean, truly, when you pass a national budget of 1.3 trillion as capital, you don't expect that this release is going to be made in one fell swoop. I mean, it is understandable that you're going to do it, release it periodically, in a case quarterly. So, I mean, when the National Assembly has issue with the fact that instead of releasing what the figure should be per quarter, that there's a shortfall in these releases. This shortfall affects the capacity and ability of MDAs that are implementing agencies to actually conclude their procurements and to actually make, issue letters of awards and therefore go ahead and implement the budget as should be.
All right, Honorable Eno, I would like us to pause here for a moment and take a listen to the presentation that the Central Bank Governor, Sanusi Lamido Sanusi, made to the National Assembly over the issue of the budget. And then, of course, we'll be looking at the attendant peculiarities. I'm talking about, the benchmark as well as his defense of differences between his proposed benchmark and that of the National Assembly. We'll be right back.
If you want to improve the revenue profile, you should focus on things where you have control. The problem with the government revenue is not the benchmark. It is NMPC not meeting output requirements and are not having the right investments in production, which I suppose with the PIB we should get the investments to expand output capacity. It's also about the amount of oil that is being stolen in the Niger Delta and fiscal leakages. If you actually focus on having a right investment environment, improving productive capacity, moving output to 3.2 million barrels a day, and blocking all those leakages from bunkering and stealing in the Niger Delta, you won't have any problem.
Well, Honorable Eno, I am sure you heard all that Mr. Sanusi had to say about the issue of budget. But then outside, not exactly outside, but at least relating to what he said, well, we're having a difference of perspective here, where he pegged the benchmark, or he was offering to peg the benchmark for next year's budget at $75 per barrel, and the House of Representatives insisted that it should be raised to $82 per barrel. Now, what I would like to find out is that, are the National Assembly's economists working at cross purposes with the economists of the executive?
Well, let me even correct this. I mean, it is not the duty or the job of the Central Bank Governor to fix the benchmark. I mean, I'm sure the Central Bank Governor was invited by that committee on MTEF, essentially to clear issues of exchange rate, and all such monetary issues. But be that as it may, you're talking about benchmark, talking about working at cross purposes. I think, for example, that look, the proposal that we have in the medium-term expenditure framework by the executive, bases the benchmark for 2013, budget on $75 to a barrel of crude. I mean, and says, for example, that the daily oil production is going to be 2.53 million barrels per day. Now, yes, I mean, I read it on paper, the work of the joint committees on finance, budget and planning, national planning, debt management, all that, hasn't formally been presented to the House at plenary. But I know I also read on paper, just like you have indicated, about the fact that there's an indication by those committees to raise the benchmark. I don't think raising a benchmark by that committee or approving the same or modifying it as the case may be by the House of Reps or the National Assembly will need some amount to working at cross purposes. Let's not forget the fact that the basis upon which we're even talking about benchmark, is a fallout of a law that was passed by the National Assembly, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, that is predicated on, you know, the oil price-based fiscal rule that tries to delink our expenditures from the vagaries of instability in the oil market and things like that. That takes into account the fact, for example, that we've gone through a lot of cycles of boom bust, that we may be selling, oil, you know, so high, you know, for today, and that quite, you know, so suddenly, you know, it may fall down, and therefore there is need for us to do some savings. You know, but let's also, you know, for those of us who are in charge of looking at the budget when it comes, as appropriation committee chairman and, you know, my members and the committee on finance and all that, we walk through quite a lot in terms of our colleagues. Let me give an example. We operate in a system where some of our colleagues don't even think that we have any basis to talk about oil's benchmark, and they have a good reason. If you look at section 162 of the Nigerian Constitution, 162 sub 1, it says that the federation shall maintain one account referred to as the federation account, into which shall be paid all revenues of government. It only makes exception to what? The proceeds of the personal income tax of personnel of the armed forces, the police, officials of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and, you know, residents of the FCT. You know, so if you look at that strict interpretation and reading of the Constitution, what it means is that if in 2013 we sell oil for $100, all such monies should go straight to the federation account. I know what happens to monies that go to that account. Such monies get shared to the three tiers of government. But you see, given our history, the National Assembly has been very supportive of the executive from the onset of democracy. Starting from 1999, when we're talking about excess crude account, without legislation. The National Assembly continued to approve oil benchmark price in spite of the market price of oil, even when there was no law. And now we have made some progress to the extent, for example, that we now have a law. That law, we now have, for example, we've gone ahead to also pass the Sovereign Wealth Authority Act, which actually legitimizes the tendency for whatever excesses that we're making out of the sale. If, for example, in 2013, we have a benchmark price that is lower than the market price, whatever excess, you know, that is sold goes into about 3 different accounts: future generations account, infrastructural account, and goes into, you know, the stabilization account. You know, so at the point that we are, I do not think, for example, that the executive makes a proposal. It is sacrosanct that that proposal must be adopted and passed by the National Assembly. What Nigerians should actually look at is what would be the reason why the National Assembly will decide to increase the benchmark. And I think that these are the issues that are very critical. In looking at the document that we have before us, which is MTEF, that document that, you know, puts the assumption for price benchmark for 2012 or 13 at $75, also has a deficit of more than 1 trillion, also has a figure for domestic borrowing of more than 700 billion. In a country, for example, where we are sure that throughout 2013, the price of oil is not expected to fall below $100. So what is important is whatever excess revenue accrues as a result of the increase in benchmark, what is the National Assembly going to use that money for? In 2012, for example, the executive made a proposal for a benchmark price of $70. The National Assembly increased to $72 and used more than half of the money to reduce deficit. Let me give you another example in terms of government's revenue assumptions. If you look at the independent revenue of government, for example, for 2013, the executive adopts the same figure of 2012, which is about 450 billion. I challenge you, go to the office of the Accountant General of the Federation, go and call for his reports and his whatever documents that he has. How has this stream of revenue performed in the last several years? I can assure you that the figure of about 450 billion for independent revenue of government for 2012, by December, government will realize up to half of that figure. If this is so, that means, for example, that we are basing our assumptions on revenue on faulty assumptions. And therefore, between the independent revenue of government that can never be realized and oil price benchmark, which is more realistic and practical,
all right,
which one is going
Honorable
to base a budget?
Let me come in here.
To look at all these things.